Alrighty, I think we'll get started now. Welcome everyone to our second episode, I guess, of the Seaweed series for 2024. Uh, Today we have some representatives from the province joining us. I just want to let you know, first of all, that we are recording. So this will be presented online on our CARTI Seaweed Series page, and also it'll be available on YouTube. So you guys will be able to see that. I am joining you actually from the Campbell River campus of North Island College, where we are on the Wewakai, Wewakam, and Quirka First Nations territories. Let me just admit these people here. Fantastic. This week was kind of chaotic, but we were over in Ottawa and there were some really interesting things happening in applied research, and some of the things happening on in Nova Scotia at the community college there involved a lot of cool research with some of the Indigenous communities over there. And the work going on in community was just super impactful, seemed to have a really good result. So it's always really cool to see the work going on in community and how beneficial those little pieces can be. So if you ever get the chance, just have a look around and see what's going on around you, because there are some really cool things on the go, and I highly recommend taking a look at it. And it's always good to see what other places have on the go too, right? We can learn from those little bits and bobs. Sorry, I'm admitting people as I go. Um, yeah, so I think today's plan is kind of a 15-minute presentation, 15 to 20 minutes from Kylee and Jessica, who we have with us today. And then we're going to open up the floor to a Q&A. Before we get there, if you do have any questions, feel free to drop them into the chat, just so they're out there and we can address them as the Q&A starts. Otherwise, we'll get you guys to raise your hands for the Q&A, and we'll just go down the list of people that have asked the questions, and I'll kind of flip-flop between the meeting chat and the questions asked by raising hands. The only thing that we kind of wanted to put a little bit of a tag on today is, if you have any questions about that are more specifically related to an application or something that you might have in process, that it would be best to email the province, and I can provide those emails afterwards, or they might be in the presentation that these guys are going to provide. So that would be kind of the only thing that that would flag today. The last thing from me before we get into it is I work for North Island College. You can see our logo down here. But I work for the Center for Applied Research, Technology, and Innovation. One of the reasons that we are doing this little piece of the Seaweed series is to kind of bring awareness to this sector and try and like build that innovation in the sector, so we can do more, we can provide more products, we can really build that sustainable economy for the province and for the nations around us and for Canada as a whole as well. So one of the things that I just wanted to quickly show you guys was our CARTI webpage. Let me see how quickly I can do this. I'm not going to break records. There we go. So hopefully you can see that. This is our CARTI webpage that kind of shows you guys what we have on the go in terms of what our department can offer. And a lot of these things are, like the Seaweed series is here, value-added products from kelp, and we have some cool stuff with this From Mio project and some nursing in community. If you're ever interested in kind of the research and innovation side, please reach out. We have some cool stuff and cool things to talk about. If you just have general questions, that's also great too. So without further ado, I will stop sharing my screen because I've spoken enough and no one really wants to hear my voice for too long. But I'll hand it over to Kylee and Jessica so that they can kind of present about what they have going on. And yeah, just as a reminder, at the end, throw your hand up. We'll ask questions or just throw them into the chat as we go, and we'll get to your questions. But yeah, go ahead. I think you might be muted, Jessica. We started off so well. We had it all sorted 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, we can't hear you, Jess. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Should I just start? Okay. Well, thank you, Logan, for inviting us to come speak to you guys today. My name is Kylee Pawluk. I am the Senior Aquatic Plant Specialist for the province of BC. I'm coming to you from the traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, so the Songhees and the Esquimalt people. Once Jess has her audio working, I'll let her introduce herself, but she is the section head for all of aquaculture in the province of BC.
Okay, I'm going to try again.
Oh, there we go.
Perfect. Okay, sorry, Kylee, to interrupt you.
No, that's great.
Thanks, everyone, for having both Kylee and I here today. And a thank you to North Island College as well for putting these on, and a particular to Natural Science and Engineering Branch Council of Canada, who provided the funding for these. And thanks, Logan, for the territorial acknowledgement. I know many of us are calling in from different locations across the province, maybe even outside the province. So just taking a moment to recognize the unceded and traditional territory of where you are today. I'm certainly very grateful, honored, and deeply grateful for the Qualicum First Nations, where I'm calling in today, where I live, play, work, and raise my family. So just taking a moment to recognize and acknowledge the area and land in which you're standing on or sitting on today. And just a shout out to the pictures we have here. I always like to do this. They come from our team or locally from our Marine Area Plan Partnership. So the biggest picture you see is a Healthsick Guardian holding giant kelp. I was in Bella Bella doing some kelp monitoring surveys, and that was a picture I took. And the other two pictures, one came from our previous section head out doing kelp monitoring and then also diving. Kelp, thanks, Kylee. We'll go to the next slide. Okay, so we're going to dive into aquatic plant aquaculture in BC. And but we're going to give a little bit of a description of our team in general. So being the section head of the aquaculture program, our aquaculture program, sort of broadly speaking, is 3 sectors. So aquatic plants is what we're going to talk about today, but we also handle shellfish and finfish. Aquatic plants does include co-culture or mariculture, as others often refer to it. But because our team is made up of all the aquaculture applications and management of those sectors in the province, we feel it's still important to include sort of what our whole portfolio looks like. So aquaculture in the provinces of BC is harmonized with our federal partners, Transport Canada and DFO, Fisheries and Oceans. So all aquaculture and aquatic plant applications are reviewed as part of that harmonized process. So we work very closely with our harmonized partners with the federal government. And if you do go through the application process or in the application process, you will know that we work very closely at all levels, right starting from the operational level right to the decision-making level as our 3 agencies. We each individually assess applications on an individual basis, and then we are informed by our own jurisdiction, legislation, regulations, policy science, and obviously consultation with First Nations, public, and stakeholder engagement. So we've got the types of aquaculture here. I'm not going to dive into this because this isn't the topic that we're speaking to today, but these are some of the types of aquaculture that we do handle within our team with the province. And I know this is probably a picture that many of you have seen, but an example of the variation of aquaculture in the province. So getting into a little more specifics for the types of aquaculture, but diving into aquatic plants. So we've got aquatic plants. We are talking both culture, wild harvest, as well as restoration. So aquatic plant culture is typically, we find deep water suspended long lines with a crownland tenure. We are also seeing an increase of the co-culture that I talked about, which is choosing to culture both shellfish and aquatic plants in the same facility, whether it's in the marine environment or on land. Aquatic plants are licensed and authorized by the province of BC under the ministry that we're in, Water, Land and Resource Stewardship, as well as Transport Canada due to the infrastructure in the marine environment and their legislated requirement around navigation. The harvest of aquatic plants in the wild, if that's okay, Kylie, is authorized only by our province. So that would be going out to the marine environment and harvesting plants that exist in the wild that are not a part of a farm or culturing industry. And just to, I know there's been some discrepancy or unknown areas. So aquatic plants aren't managed or authorized under DFO or through their Pacific aquaculture regulation. However, they do have jurisdiction when it comes to fish and fish habitat. And again, we are harmonized with DFO and work very closely with them in all of aquaculture and work to ensure that they are brought in when their mandate is activated. This is a slide that sort of shows the aquaculture and aquatic plant team for Canada and BC. We have a memorandum of understanding, and that's the agreement on aquaculture management. And so just a broad overview of where things land. And the 2 pieces that I'll just speak to here is the 2 BC side. So we've got our lands branch that has our operational policy around Crown land tenuring, and as well as the operational side of the BC Fish and Seafood Act, which is what we authorize aquatic plant culturing and wild harvest under. And then we also have a sector of the same ministry who is our strategic arm. They handle the strategic side and our key relationship lead with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. This is the last slide that I'll speak to, and then I'm going to pass it over to Kylie. So just wanted to highlight the legislation and regulation that we are referencing while we talk about aquatic plants. So the BC Fish and Seafood Act is that legislation that we provide the authorization to culture, to harvest, and the top end that we look to for our legislation. And then we also have a regulation, the Fish and Seafood Licensing Regulation, which has more definitive and defined licensing regimes, license conditions, and so on and so forth.
All right, I'm going to take over. Thanks, Jess. So I'm sure all of you already know what aquatic plants are, but given that most of what we're going to be talking about today is actually seaweed harvesting, it is called aquatic plant under Section 1 of the Fish and Seafood Act. But it covers everything from benthic and attached algae, whether that's brown, green, or red. It also encompasses eelgrass, which is more relevant for restoration rather than for culturing, but also phytoplankton. And it's any products or byproducts of these aquatic plants or any part of an aquatic plant. So first, I'm going to jump into aquatic plant culturing. As Jess said, this is managed provincially by the Ministry of Water, Lands and Resource Stewardship. So our aquaculture team, we actually have an aquatic plant team which specializes just in licensing of aquatic plant culturing. The most common species that we're culturing at the moment across the province, we have our sugar kelp, winged kelp, bull kelp, and giant kelp. There are approximately 30 aquatic plant licenses and about 4,000 metric tons being produced per year right now. And most of these species are, most of these licenses are to cultivate kelps in the marine environment using suspended long lines. But we are seeing an increase in co-culture with shellfish farms. So why are people choosing to culture aquatic plants? There's a number of reasons that we have heard why people are making the switch or are adding kelp farms to the area. It's for commercial uses, so food, cosmetics, animal feed, and pharmaceuticals. It generally has a smaller ecological footprint than other aquaculture industries. It's not fed, so it's that low input. And it takes out less from the marine environment than other forms of aquaculture. It can provide economic opportunities to remote communities, and it can provide, in some cases, environmental benefits, such as new habitat. It can help reduce coastal erosion by reducing wave force, and it can absorb anthropogenic nitrogen and carbon. In terms of the regulation of it, there are basically, if you are starting a culture farm from start to finish, so the collection of reproductive material from wild plants all the way up to the final harvesting of the cultured plants, there are up to 3 licenses that you might need. So if you are harvesting reproductive material from the environment, so you're going out, you're collecting those sori patches from a bull kelp, for example, you would need a wild aquatic plant harvest license. I'll talk a little bit more about that one in a bit. If you have an upland facility where you are taking those sori patches, inducing sporulation and growing that up to a juvenile sporophyte stage, that would be a hatchery aquatic plant culture license, or an upland license as it's often called. Both of those 2 licenses fall squarely under the Fish and Seafood Act. And then once you're moving into the marine environment, where you're putting infrastructure in the marine environment and often seeded lines, that falls under 2 different legislations. The first is the Fish and Seafood Act, and the second is the Navigable Waters Act, which is authorized by Transport Canada. So just for anybody out there who might be doing any of these parts without a license, I would suggest getting in touch with us. Once your application has been submitted for this, there are a number of things that we consider when we're looking at these applications. We're looking at the species that you are hoping to cultivate. The province does not allow the cultivation of non-native species in the marine environment. We also look at seed sourcing. So where are you getting that parent material from, which has been, being cultured in the lab and then re-outplanted? How far is it to the outplanting site? And how many parent individuals are you using in that culturing methodology? We're also looking at the density of plants being grown on the infrastructure. Obviously, we don't want it too high because that then has biosecurity issues. So components like disease transmission becomes higher if the plants are too dense, and other factors like that. We also look at site considerations. So physical features, is it in a good place? Is it overlapping with other activities? Species at risk more falls under DFO, but they do comment on whether or not, that is an area, like if there's significant overlap with abalone habitat. We look at the type of infrastructure that's being put in place. We look at food safety. So for example, how close is it to a marina? Particularly brown seaweeds are known to be excellent at uptaking heavy metals. So we want to make sure that the farm is being placed in an area where it won't have negative impact if it is being used as a food source. And then we also look at other application area components, such as the proximity to existing wild aquatic plant beds. So we want to make sure that the farm isn't overlapping, and if it is, if you are cultivating a different species than what is, in close proximity to it, we want to make sure there's no hybridization of that. So moving on to our wild harvest, we are deep in the middle of it for this year. Wild aquatic plant harvesting has been happening on our coast for a very long time. We've managed that. Specifically, there's no component that Transport Canada or DFO looked at in terms of wild harvest. And we've seen, a pretty large number of wild harvest applications over the last few years. We're now seeing nations applying themselves for harvest quotas to support nation harvesting. And one of the components of this is that we try and look at all aspects of the wild harvest. So we have this, handy little slide. We actually have a more expansive version of this, which we will send to Logan as a PDF, and he can share it with you all, but it gives a bit of a breakdown of the application process. Wild harvest is different to those culture licenses in that there is an actual legislated deadline that we require harvest applications to be received for the next harvest year. So if you want to harvest for 2025, you would need to submit your application to us by October 1st. So applications are received and reviewed by our aquatic plant team. And just like our culture applications, they are sent out for consultation and for referrals where necessary. Once that's complete, the decision maker takes all relevant information, just like they do for the culture application, to consider when making decisions on licenses. So we look at any biomass estimates and density data that we may have accessible to us. We look at what has been previously harvested in the area, and we take into account considerations like Aboriginal rights and title or FSC requirements. So decisions on that is typically made in March, between March and August of that year. And then obviously the harvest season begins once you receive your harvest license, but it ends notably on December 31st of that year, after which we require a harvest record. So you have to write down everything that you harvested and submit it back to us with your royalty payments. So the two processes are different. The culture license can be up for 10 years at a maximum, whereas the harvest license at this point is only a 1-year license. And we thought we would throw in just a little bit about aquatic plant restoration, because we are seeing quite a bit more restoration happening on our coast. Obviously, this is happening because of the decline in wild aquatic plant beds, both in terms of our canopy kelps, but also eelgrass. And because of the legislation, we are required to provide permissions for all of those restoration projects. Anytime wild aquatic plants or cultivated aquatic plants are being moved around in the marine environment, you need permission under the Fish and Seafood Act to be able to do that. Restoration can be a little bit easier of a permitting than culture or wild harvest. There aren't as many requirements if there is no infrastructure being installed in the marine environment. So if there is no infrastructure, then chances are you will only need a written permission from us instead of having to go through that complete application process. But if there is infrastructure going into the marine environment, you basically have to apply for that similar, like a full license that you would get both from the province, but also from Transport Canada, because that infrastructure could potentially impact safe navigation. So all of this restoration information is going to be coming up on our website. We are in the process of developing a website for restoration, which will include a more extensive version of this decision tree, as well as a full application. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Jess.
Thank you, Kylie. We just wanted to throw a slide up here just to show our aquatic plant team, specifically working on aquatic plants. So, and sorry, Caitlin, I think you're on the call. We've got your name wrong, and that's totally my bad. So, Caitlin's recently changed her name, but Caitlin's our aquatic plant specialist. And is one of our subject matter experts on the culture side. Kylee, who's presented today, as you know, is our senior aquatic plant specialist. Also works in the culture, wild harvest, and restoration. And then myself as the section head, so I oversee the aquatic plant team as well as the other sectors of aquaculture. And in this, so the three of us work really closely together as the regulator from the operations perspective, but we also work very closely with our strategic arm and our group within the same ministry, but that has that strategic role in the sector of aquatic plants. One other thing I would note is that it is a designation for decision making. And so in the province of BC, the BC Fish and Seafood Act designates both Kylee and I as decision makers, and then the Minister of Water, Land and Resource Stewardship, Minister Cullen. And then I think our last slide is just our contact info. And before we jump to questions, many of you on the call have been contacting us at our email, which is aquaticplants.courtney@gov.bc.ca. We are transitioning to a new email address. A part of that is because with ministry reorgs and the sort of new approach to telework, many of us don't sit directly in Courtney. We're across the region and possibly in other areas of the province. And so we felt it more representative to change it. So we are moving to a new email address of aquaticplants.program@gov.bc.ca. You can contact us still at either one of those today, but just a heads up, we are transitioning to the new one. Please do not hesitate to reach out to us at that email inbox. We all monitor it, we all check it, and it's a way for us to, take any general questions. If you've got questions about applications or just generally wanting to speak with us about aquatic plants, that's where you can get a hold of us. So I'll pass it over to Logan, and I think I can't see the chat. I'm assuming that that you've got access to that, and we'll take questions.
I can see the chat here, so if anyone does have any questions that they don't want to raise their hand for, you can just throw it in the chat, and I'll get to those. But if anyone has any questions, just use the raise hand function, which is in the reactions button somewhere down here. And we'll slowly get to you guys. I think that was a great overview of the processes that you guys have, which is fantastic. Kind of gives some clarity on a lot of the questions that are out there.
And I think, Logan, we had said that we would also be sharing this presentation. So Logan was going to send it out as well. So just wanted to make sure that that's available for those on the call. Yeah,
absolutely. The whole seminar is recorded and it'll be on there. But if there are slides, and I know you mentioned that there'll be a piece there as well that you'll put in a PDF and send over. So I can absolutely send that out. We've got a couple of questions coming in the chat. So
Logan, can I raise my hand, please, for when I'm next?
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't you go first?
Oh, okay, sorry, I can't do the raise hand on my phone.
That's okay.
Hi, Jessica. It's Leona Humchit from Bella Bella. How are you?
Hi, Leona. Nice to see you. I noticed your name right away. I'm fine, thanks. Nice to chat again.
Yeah, for sure. A couple things. I wanted to know of the three different sectors mentioned at the beginning there, where would aquaponics fit in?
Yeah, super good question, Leona. So with aquaponics, it depends on what you're growing. First off, we do have like a land-based application for nurseries. So if you're culturing aquatic plants in an upland facility, which some of you on the call either do personally or through your company, we have an application for that. But when it comes to the aquaponics, it's a little bit of a grayer area. So for us, we look at the land or land covered by water, and that's what covers what is covered under the Land Act. And then we look at the culture of aquatic plants. And in our regulation is a list of those aquatic plants that fall under our jurisdiction. So when either one of those sort of situations doesn't fall to us, we look to other possible sectors or legislation that may cover it. So you may have a specific situation or species or a plant that you're looking at, Leona. And so I think if you give us a little more, you and I can either connect offline, and then we can try and see if we can point you in the right direction, if it's not us.
Yeah, I would love to connect offline on that. We're actually looking at a system where we're having like a recirculating aquaculture system on land-based. We're going to our community to decide which species to cultivate, but we're going to have that hooked up to a hydroponics garden to grow produce and root vegetables. So that circular system, we can talk offline. But the other question I had was, and you were talking about, Kylee was talking about cultivating seaweed or kelp that are within a certain parameter of where it's being cultivated. I think that's huge, and something that I've always felt really strongly about in terms of, you know, my community and learning from what happened up with the Exxon Valdez oil spill. You know, Dune Lankard has pivoted to kelp cultivation as a result of, you know, all of his species dying as a result of the oil spill. He pivoted to cultivation, and one of his you know, values and guiding principles is that they're not cultivating anything that's natural to their waters within a 50-mile radius. And I think that's a really good you know, precautionary principle in terms of, you know, like hybridization and all that and the like. But definitely, yeah, we're just for everyone on the call, all the kelp lovers. I'm wanting to have a kelp conference in Bella Bella, and really this coming week, you know, I'm really happy to announce that we're going to be creating a formal voice of our fishers and creating a co-op. And so I want to be able to create a strategic plan for that co-op. So part of that would be bringing in specialists around seaweed, the government invited to, you know, help my people, inform them to make a 5-year strategic plan on foods under the banner of food sovereignty as it relates to our breadbasket. So yeah, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Leona. That's really exciting work. And thank you to you and your community for you know, having me there. The picture behind me is a picture I took with the Health Sick Guardians and doing some monitoring, and so really grateful to be up there. And Leona, you brought up a good point of the 50-kilometer radius. You know, the province worked with Dr. Louis Drial as well. That's something that the Alaska is implementing, and they are one of the places sort of on the forefront of kelp research or seaweed research, and they've implemented that 50-kilometer precautionary principle. We are in the very early stages of developing an aquatic plant policy for the province, and it's things like that we hope to be added, you know, adding in there. And looking to all those researchers on the call, thank you for all the work you're doing to help, you know, inform the creation of policy. We obviously will do consultation, stakeholder engagement when we're at a point in which it's to a place that we can do that. But these are all things that we are considering. And thanks again, Leona, for that, the comment and questions.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Leona. we always love coming up to Bella Bella to do our gooey duck project, and we're excited to come up next time, and maybe we can have a chat with you when we're up there.
For sure.
Yeah, fantastic. There are a couple of questions in the chat here. I might do one or two of those and then come back. Clay's got his hand up. Perfect. So let me grab this first question, then I'll come over to Clay. First one is, what is the production level in BC you mentioned?
So just in the presentation, is that the question? Now I'm just looking for the notes. I think Kylie, that would have been in one of our notes. I'm just trying to pull that.
That's probably an older number.
Does that differentiate between cultivated kelps and wild harvest as well?
Yes.
It does, yeah. So there is a difference between the culture versus the wild harvest, and so and it's there's just the approach is different, and so in a cultured conditions of license, you are given like a quantity in which you can grow, and for wild harvest, similar, you're given a quota, but at the end of your license or harvesting season, you are required by legislation to submit a harvester report and royalty in which you indicate how much you harvested based on the quota you were given. So sometimes when you are harvesting in the marine environment, the wild harvest, I should say, is there are variations. As we know, kelp or seaweed does move, and sometimes conditions are changed. Socioeconomic factors come in, such as labor. So you're not always hitting the quota in which that you were granted into your license. So they do differ a little bit. And I was sorry, I'm just looking for that number. Maybe when I find it, we'll pop it in the chat. That Kylie spoke at. Unless Kylie, you have it right at your fingertips.
Yeah, it's 4,000 metric tons per year. But that might be a few years old now. So
is that the cultivated kelp or the wild harvest numbers?
Cultivated. That was cultivated.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. Clay, go ahead.
Thanks, Logan, and thanks, Kylie and Jessica. I had a question about the infrastructure component of the permitting, but before that, I was just wondering, or just to confirm, for the aquatic plant policy you mentioned that might be relevant to the 50-kilometer question and restoration, you said there will be a consultation where stakeholders can provide input? Okay,
absolutely.
Then I have thoughts on that, but I can wait till that point. Yeah, for the infrastructure question, yeah, I guess, is there a strict definition of what infrastructure is, or is it more of the case that like you know it when you see it and it's kind of context dependent? And I'm asking from the perspective of like, we're not using the kinds of like material that a farmer might use, but sometimes we might have an interest in like putting something non-natural in the water for an experiment that's potentially very small and not going to pose a navigation hazard. But yeah, I don't know. Could you speak to that a little bit, or does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thanks, Clay. And maybe what I would say to the policy side, you have our email address. We're happy to take comments. You can't see, there's no draft to share today, but if you have thoughts and feedback, we're willing to take that at any time. So, but yes, there will absolutely be consultation, engagement, and all that space. So when it comes to the infrastructure, this is where we are. I'm just going to say I'm stepping out of my jurisdiction a little bit and into Transport Canada. So I'll do my best to try and articulate what their legislative requirements are. And so as you indicated, it has to do with navigation. And so things like long lines, buoys, those sorts of things, as if they could present a risk to navigation, that's where Transport Canada jurisdiction comes in and their mandate, and they need to review infrastructure in the marine environment based on that. So that is more of a Transport Canada requirement. And so it will, again, Clay, depend on the type of infrastructure you're looking at. And like you said, if it's not impeding navigation, then, and that's just sort of broadly speaking, but I would say for us, we would still want to make sure of that with Transport Canada, because we don't want to speak on their behalf because it is their legislative and mandate requirement. But that's where Transport Canada does come in, is if it's infrastructure that could pose a risk to navigation. Kylee, do you want to add anything?
No, I think you covered it, Jess.
Okay.
Yeah,
thank you both.
Yeah, and Clay, if you have specific, like, oh, this is the type of infrastructure, this is where I want to put it, send us an email. We're happy to like dive into that exact particular situation or infrastructure you're proposing.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Fantastic. We'll just go through a couple more questions in the chat, and if more come up in here, we'll get to those as well. Is Sarah still in here? I might be able to get to hers. No, she's already popped off. Okay. So the next question was from Jacqueline, and she asks, with restoration efforts increasing, what is the ETA on restoration permitting processes? Are salt marsh vegetations being included as part of aquatic plants?
Yeah, great question. Kylee, do you want me to start, or do you want to dive in?
I can dive in. So salt marsh absolutely falls under our jurisdiction in terms of like the transplant of salicornia, or so pickleweed, it's sometimes called, sea asparagus, as well as the actual salt grasses. So we would permit any sort of transplanting of those. Salt marshes are a little bit trickier because the actual land component doesn't fall to us. So we wouldn't be involved in the permitting of the land if any infrastructure needs to be put on that, higher intertidal area. That would fall to the lands branch. So there's two activities that would have to happen there. So the application to the land tenure would have to go to lands, and then we would do a permit for the transplant. And typically permits for that are quite quick. We do prioritize those. It doesn't go through that full harmonized process. It comes straight to us. We review them, ask any follow-up questions that are needed. We send it to DFO for any fish and fish habitat as required. So we have a bit of a backdoor in that regard. And then we would provide you with the permission under the Fish and Seafood Act for that part. Did you have any follow-ups for that, Jacqueline? Also,
sure, I'll just go verbal. I was just also wondering when the website is going to be up to date, because as you said, there's probably a lot of people who aren't as very aware of the role that the province plays, and I think this has been a pretty big gap that I think a lot of different restoration groups are beginning to identify. They're not as aware and think that anything that they get through DFO may be the full-on authorization.
Yeah, thanks, Jacqueline. And I think just generally we are aware, and we're working not only internally with the federal government and our own provincial government, but also with those interested in restoration to get this information out. We unfortunately did just go through another ministry reorg, which delayed getting our website, but we are working to try and get it updated, as well as Kylee had that sort of decision tree in the presentation on sort of restoration. We're hoping to get that on there. So we do know it's a gap, and we, acknowledge that we're not coming down in terms of the compliance piece. So the more that we can get the word out, but we have put that as a high priority, Jacqueline, to get that onto our website. And if anyone has questions on restoration, please don't hesitate to contact us. But we are working hard to get that information updated and out there into the public sphere.
Fantastic. Okay, the next one is from Sarah. She asks, she first says, thanks for the presentation. She asks, how are/aren't potential cumulative impacts of the 3 different permitting processes considered?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. And I know she had to jump off the call, so I'm glad that we're getting to this this question for sure. And it's something that's being talked about province-wide when it comes to cumulative effects or cumulative impacts, and it's being talked about in the natural resource like sector in general. So it's not just specific to the conversation itself of cumulative impacts or cumulative effects is something that is being looked at across the province. We are, looking to find ways to ensure that we are considering cumulative effects into our technical review side of applications as well as decision making. There isn't a formal framework that I can say this is how we would consider these things. There's still a lot of research being done, information coming forward. That's part of one of the reasons we have undertaken this policy work to try and help get us a place where we've got a policy that we can work on. But that's something I would say is a conversation that's happening across the natural resource sector, but specifically in the aquatic plant world, and I know to most of our hearts, canopy kelp. And so I don't have like a beautiful answer that is wonderful today, but I really hope that in the near future that we have something that's more materialized. I would just say that there are still cumulative effects and cumulative impact pieces that we do consider. Kylee, did you want to add anything to that question from Sarah?
Okay, fantastic. We have a couple more questions left. I think a couple of them are follow-ups. Kevin, hi Kevin, asks, 4,000 metric tons per year refers to wet weight, correct? And if that data is a few years old, when will up-to-date data be shared?
Yeah, thanks very much, Kevin, and hi, Kevin. Yeah, it is wet weight. It refers to wet weight, and we're hoping the data soon. I would hope that the data is soon. So, Ministry of Agriculture does play a little bit of a role in our data collection, as it's the Ministry of Agriculture and Food, and so there is a role they play in data collection. And we're recently with the ministry reorg, making sure that we're sharing the data components so that we have access to the record. So in some cases of particularly for culturing, there is requirements through Ministry of Agriculture for culturers to submit reports. And so making sure our two ministries are talking. So Kevin, we're working to have some updated numbers and have them more readily at our fingertips to share with people. So I'm hoping that, like late spring to have that, early to late spring to have an updated number for you and for others.
I'm just going to pop the email in the chat. So to the email where you can actually request those data yourself, Kevin. I'm just looking up the right email.
Awesome. So while you're doing that, I'll move on to Maximilian has a question. How would we navigate permitting if we want to engage in restoration work on kelp/shellfish farms? Would that be through a co-culture license, even if kelp is not being removed/sold?
Yeah, thanks, Maximilian. Great question. And it's going to depend on a lot of factors of do you have a current Land Act tenure and a current culture license that is you're currently have a co-culture facility. In that case, is the restoration activity taking place within your currently approved tenure? So I think we've got a couple of questions that might be, like very specific to the situation, that you may need a culture license. We may be able to vary your culture license to include restoration activities. So I highly recommend shoot us an email if you've got already a co-culture tenure in place, include that file number. because that will help and it will sort of dictate what the sort of specific answer to you will be. I think what I would say generally about restoration is it's something that we are doing our best to support, and knowing that restoration is so important. It's been identified as part of our coastal marine strategy for the province. In general, across the world, restoring ecosystems is very high upon, many climate change or other NGO mandates. And so we want to promote and support restoration where we can. Sometimes it's very specific to certain situations, and I would say this is one of those cases. So please, Maximilian, email us and we will work to answer that question definitively for you.
Fantastic. Kevin asks, with your new name change, should we stop referring to Flinrod and now use walrus?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I know we've gone through a few ministry reiterations. So yeah, we are now Walrus or Waterland Resource Stewardship. Again, working to update application templates, websites, and things, but we have moved over to that new ministry, and that's what we'll be sticking with, we hope, for the very near future.
Fantastic. The acronyms are great. Walrus. Leona asks, has this harmonized group of provincial sectors penned an UNDRIP/DRIPA implementation plan? First Nations lens policies include the radius of natural species for cultivation, restoration with First Nations in their area, First Nations input on harvest, cultivation, and restoration, etc.
Yeah, Leona, that's a great sort of statement and point. So with the harmonization side, because we've got two governments, we each have different mandates and legislation. So the Declaration Act is the provincial legislation that we are under. We don't have a harmonized piece. So when we look at, and I'll just talk like application specific, when we look at the consultation that we undertake for culture, land act tenures, or wild harvest, that is done not with our harmonized partners. That the province is something that we do ourselves because we have to uphold, our legislative and legal requirements. We haven't directly been tasked with the implementation plan. However, the ministry, both Walrus and the Ministry of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation, has been pinned with an implementation plan on how we plan to operationalize the Declaration Act. And I know that's in both the Minister Rankin and Minister Cullen's mandate letters. So what we hope to do, Leona, is influence what that looks like from that operational level, so that we can include, HELTSIC's viewpoint and vision for culture, restoration, and input on what's happening in your territory. So, from our perspective, we are relying on our ministry partners to do some of the higher level work, but we really hope to have the opportunity to do that at an operational level with nations.
Fantastic. I think those are all of the questions in the chat. I hope I haven't missed any. So I think, unless anyone has any follow-up questions or questions that they still would like to ask, I'll just give it a second, but we might finish up there. The last couple of things that I would like to mention again is if anyone is interested in following up, I will be able to provide the emails for Kylee and Jessica if they have any specific questions, or I can follow up with the general email for the department. And the same if you have any specific questions relating to your applications, I would follow up there. And just a reminder that it's going to be recorded and posted on the CARTI page. So if you would like to review this, or you'd like to send it over to people that didn't get a chance to participate today, please do, and follow up with any questions for either myself or for our two lovely presenters. I think that's about everything. Thank you for joining, everyone. Enjoy your afternoons, and thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone. Happy
you.
Family Day weekend.